Hello, it's time for the April wrap-up, talking about books, the manga, the anime. Let's get into it. Okay, the first book I want to talk about is The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. This is book 1 in the Stormlight Archive, and I'm going to keep this section brief because I already made a 40-minute long video talking only about The Way of Kings, so I think that was probably long enough. Just to kind of summarize The Way of Kings, I'm actually not really sure how to summarize this one, to be honest with you. There's not really a strong plot here, so I guess I'm just going to try my best. This is set in a world where there are these super strong, destructive storms that blow through every so often, blow through the world. The story follows a few people that don't really relate to that premise, so at least not yet. I'm sure they will at some point. It's just not really explained to us in this book, so that was fun. But anyways, that's the best I can give you. Just read the blurb on Goodreads. It still doesn't really tell you a lot, but everyone knows what Way of Kings is about at this point. But anyways, like I said, I have a 40-minute long video. So yeah, I'll keep this fairly brief. I rated this 2 stars. I really didn't enjoy this at all. I think it has some really good potential. I like the idea of the story. I just don't really like the telling of it. I think the world building was really shallow. I thought the characters were really bland. I thought it was horribly boring in the middle, which is a huge atrocity to me because this is 1,000 pages. So that's a long middle. And as I just said, it's 1,000 pages. To me, it's too long. It did not justify its page count at all. So all that kind of added up to be a bad experience to me. So I did not like The Way of Kings. Moving on. The next book I want to talk about is Elric of Melnibone. I think that's how you pronounce it, by Michael Moorcock. So this one is about Elric, as the title suggests. He's the main character. He is this emperor or king, I think he's an emperor though, of a nation called Melnibone, who is very powerful and very ancient. It's been around for a long time. So Elric is just trying to do his best to rule this nation, despite his cousin Yurkun trying to thwart him at every turn and steal the throne. And Elric also feels that he can't relate to his people because he is super moody. He's super broody, and he's very philosophical, and apparently the people of Melnibone are not that. He's a goth ruler of this place. This is another one where it's kind of hard to define, just like The Way of Kings, because the plot is just all over the place. It's not really focused, but a lot of it boils down to, as I said before, the fact that his cousin Yurkun wants the throne and desperately tries to take it from Elric at every turn. So this one, unfortunately, I also rated 2 stars. I am really disappointed that I did not like this one. I thought this was going to be right up my alley. The summary for it sounded so cool. I thought that Elric seemed like a character I was really going to love because I like those moody, broody type of people. But Elric was just not interesting. And on top of that, I really didn't love the writing of this book. I kind of had the same problem in the writing with this one as I had with The Way of Kings, where the writing is too in your face, kind of. There's no subtext. It was they did this and then they did this and then they did this. And that's the whole thing. It's super descriptive and not in a good way. There were also plot conveniences just thrown every which way in this book. It was a Deus Ex Machina galore. That's not always a problem, in my opinion, because sometimes it does happen, but the author does a good job of hiding it or distracting you with other things like really good characters or a really cool world or really good prose. But this one did not have any of that. So it also was only ever the solution to any problem that was ever presented in this book. The protagonists never solved anything on their own. I don't think, not a single problem. They were always saved by some spirit that exists or some god that they awaken or something. It was just, it got really frustrating. It just made me dislike the character because I was you're worthless. Also, the characters were pretty one-dimensional. I didn't really get a lot of depth to any of them. And again, that is okay sometimes if the characters are fun, which here they weren't even that fun. They were just depressingly bland. So that didn't help either. Also, on the topic of characters, there was really bad female representation in this book, which again is something that I can be distracted from by other things, but There was nothing to distract me here. There was only one woman in the entire book, I think. The whole freaking book, there was one woman, Cimmeril. And she was only a damsel in distress. She didn't do anything. She didn't serve any other purpose to the plot other than to be something that Elric has to, like, save all the time. She has no discernible personality. Like I said, she lived only for Elric. And, dude, she's his cousin. Ew. So, unfortunately, yeah, I'm probably not going to read any more Elric. Just based on the writing style, I don't think it gels with me. I might try the graphic novels at some point because I still, I don't want to give up on Elric. So, I might try that at some point. But for now, I'm probably not going to read any more of the books. All right, the next book I want to talk about is Cinder by Marissa Meyer. This is the first book in the Lunar Chronicles series. It's a YA kind of fantasy sci-fi series. And this one is yet another one that's kind of hard to describe to me because the plot isn't very strong. Basically, it is a retelling of Cinderella, a sci-fi retelling of Cinderella. In this story, Cinderella is a cyborg. Her name is Cinder, and she's a mechanic. She's just trying to get by and survive her stepmother's abuse. She meets the prince. She goes to a ball at the end. There's also a plague going around in the story. Topical. And there's also a mysterious moon civilization that's at odds with Earth. That's kind of fun. This one I rated 3 stars. I actually mostly enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty good. I wasn't sure how it was going to feel because YA is pretty hit or miss for me. I feel like I never know where I'm going to land with those books. But like I said, it was generally pretty enjoyable, so I'm happy with it. To me, the best part, my favorite part, was the world building. I am a huge fan of these kind of near future sci-fi type of worlds. I think they're really cool. And there's a whole moon culture. I love that. That's so cool. I think the author did a really good job of setting up the world and setting up what the current state of the world is and the problems that have arisen. The stakes were set up really well in this. I also think the plot was pretty good. One thing I didn't really like was the romance, the main romance, which felt a little messy to me and a little forced, but overall the main external plot I really liked. I thought it was really engaging. It was very interesting, and that is what made me keep reading. I also think there's pretty good villains. I think the author created some really good hateable villains. Like, yeah, I want to see them destroyed. I want to read to see how they're going to be thwarted. I will say this book does end kind of on a cliffhanger, which isn't really my favorite. It's one of those things where it kind of cuts off right as the action is ramping up. And I don't really like that because it just feels like really unsatisfying to me. External plot-wise, pretty much nothing was resolved by the end of this book. So yeah, it's kind of a negative. But on the positive side, most of the emotional arcs that were set up in this book were resolved by the end. So that's good. About the characters, Cinder as a protagonist was pretty good. I liked her. I feel like with YA, sometimes that main protagonist can just really make it or break it. But Cinder was pretty good. I mostly liked her. She was smart and she was resourceful, which I liked. I didn't really get too much of a personality from her other than snarky, but that's fine, I guess. I wanted more, but I'm not too beat up about it. Also, I loved the little robot, the android that she had, Aiko. So precious. Kai, who is the prince, the other romantic lead in the book, I didn't really like him. Not because he's problematic at all, just because he kind of has no backbone. And he's supposed to be a ruler, a leader. And dude, you need to stand up for yourself and your nation. I don't know. I just wanted to reach through the page and slap him and be like, who raised you? He lets the villains walk all over him. He lets everyone walk all over him. Oh my gosh, dude. But anyways, the romance in this book, I also wasn't a huge fan of. I thought, as I said before, it seemed kind of messy. It was kind of forced. It never really read as romance to me. It felt like Cinder and Kai were more really good friends than romantically involved. There was no chemistry between them. It wasn't good. I don't know if it'll get better in later books, but for now, I didn't buy into it at all. All that said, overall, I enjoyed this. It was pretty fun, and it was interesting enough that I do want to pick up the next book in the series. So I always think that's a good thing. Okay, the next book I want to talk about is Wild and Wicked Things by Francesca May. This book was set in the 1920s, in I think the 20s. Oh my God. Did I just assume that the whole time and I don't know? I'm like 90% sure it's supposed to be the 1920s. Okay. So it's set in England and it's about a woman named Annie who goes to Crow Island after being summoned upon the death of her father. On Crow Island, there is notoriously a lot of magic, witchy goings on. And Annie gets swept up into that world after she sees a confrontation between one of these witches and her best friend, who she has not seen in a couple years. It's been a while. So it's a lot of witchcraft. It's a lot, like I said, it's witchy. I rated this book 3 stars. I liked it and I didn't like it. I would rate this a 3. So I have 2 3s in a row. I have Cinder in this. I would rate Cinder above Wild and Wicked Things in terms of enjoyment, even though they're both 3s. So do with that information what you will. This book, I think, started out strong in the first half, and then it kind of fell off for me. So what I liked in the first half was the tone that the author was setting and the atmosphere she was building. It really made me feel like I was there. Like I got it. I was there. The world building she did was pretty good. And I personally was content to just sit in that for a while. I liked the mysterious air surrounding everything. And I liked Annie trying to kind of weave herself into the magical world in the beginning. Then in the second half, the plot kind of picked up, which usually is a really good thing. That's where people's interest usually starts to go up. And that's where my interest usually starts to go up. So it's kind of backwards that's when my interest started to wane. But that is exactly what happened. It started getting kind of boring to me because then at that point, all the world building kind of went out the window and the author just stopped. And suddenly all of the characters seemed to lose all of their brain cells and started bickering like children. And it was really annoying. To me, none of the characters were likable. They were all so judgy and rude. It felt like they were the stupidest people I've ever read, coming up with the stupidest solutions to problems that they themselves created. It's like, how am I supposed to feel any sympathy for you or understand you at all when I hate you all? One of the main things in this book was the miscommunication trope, which, oh my freaking God, I hate. I feel like most people hate that. So if that's something that really just irks you and gets you, do not read this book because it's going to be so frustrating. All of the characters constantly blamed each other for everything that was happening instead of ever like introspecting and being like, maybe I'm the problem, which they all should have, because they all were the problems in their own ways. It made me unable to sympathize with anyone, like I said, and all I wanted to see was their downfalls. I wanted them to get their comeuppance. I wanted them to have to pay for their mistakes, and it felt like almost no one did. So yet another thing that was annoying. By the ending, everything just worked out perfectly, and it was all resolved super nicely when it really shouldn't have been. Like, all logic would tell you it should not have been that nice of an ending. That was a bad ending and very unbelievable, in my opinion. Also, on the topic of the romance, I think the sapphic romance really fit this book. However, it was very insta-lovey. I didn't love that. I just don't think the author wrote it well. So yeah, I didn't love this, didn't hate it. Like I said, I really liked the first half, did not like the second half. So I just fell in the middle. By the end, it felt like I was there for the vibes, not the plot. So I think people who really like witchy type of stories and who like the vibe and the world building of the 20s would probably really like this. I kept seeing people on Goodreads say it's like Gatsby-esque, which I've never read The Great Gatsby, so I can't relate to that. I don't know if that's true. I know it's like set in the same time period, but I don't know if the tone is the same. So I'm just gonna go with what they're saying and say if you like The Great Gatsby, you might like this. So anyways, that was Wild and Wicked Things. Okay, the final book before I get into manga and anime that I want to talk about is Stardust by Neil Gaiman. This book is about a young man named Tristan Thorne who lives in the village of Wall. He promises to go retrieve a fallen star for a girl in the village who he wants to marry, or at least enter a relationship with. To get the star, he has to go travel into the land of Fairy, which borders Wall. What follows is a really awesome fairy tale-esque story with the adventures Tristan has as he travels through the land of Fairy to try and find this fallen star. So, this book, I rated 5 stars. I loved this. This was magical. It was whimsical. It was everything I could ever ask for in a fairy story. I love fairy tales. I absolutely love fairy tales. It's one of my favorite genres and or subgenres of fantasy, if not my favorite. This was just a perfect fairy tale story. I think the characters were really endearing. The prose was beautiful. Neil Gaiman's prose is always so good to me. And it was perfect for this type of story. There were also multiple different plot lines in the story. You had Tristan, obviously. There were also these witches that were hunting the star. There were some princes in fairy that were trying to figure out a plan of succession for the throne. There was a whole other thing with this lady. Anyways, I don't want to give too much away, but all these plot lines really were weaved together so nicely, and they all came together at the end in such a satisfying way. I kind of felt the same way about The Way of Kings, where there were these different plot lines that felt really unrelated, but here I was able to forgive that because this is only a 200 odd page book versus The Way of Kings, which is 1,000+ pages. So it was way more worth it here. The only negative I have for this book is that I waited this long to read it. This is definitely going to be a reread one for me. I absolutely loved it. Neil Gaiman has such a talent for writing things with the whimsy of a child, but that are also catered towards adults. So it's like the perfect combination of things in my mind. And I just love his writing style and his stories. So yeah, Stardust was perfect. I loved it. I would recommend it if you at all like fairy tales or fairies in any ways. It's also nice and short too, so it's perfect. So that's the end of the books. Let me just quickly talk about manga. I only read 1 volume this month. It was Bleach again. I read volume 16, which is still smack dab in the middle of the Soul Society arc. It's still very good. I still want to keep going. I slowed down because now at this point I have to go to another library to keep getting more volumes because dude, manga is expensive and I don't want to buy all the volumes. So I'm just going to the library to get them. And now I have to go to the other one that's harder to get to. So I'm putting it off, but I really want to keep going with Bleach. I'm really enjoying it. It's so fun. Yeah, I will continue on. So yeah. And then on the topic of anime, I just want to say I started watching Demon Slayer and I really like it. I have completed all of these arcs so far in the anime. I am currently in the middle of the Hashira gathering something arc. Liking that one too a lot. Demon Slayer took me quite a bit to get into. I kept starting and stopping it because I was like, I'm not into this. But then once it was the something mansion or manor arc, I'll put the name down here. I was like, oh, this is good. This is creepy and good. And I love it. And I like Zenitsu and I like Inosuke. Plus I kept seeing these clips and kind of like little scenes and shots of things that happen in later seasons. And I was like, oh, that looks so cool. I need to get to that. So I was like, I'm just going to push through. I'm sure at some point it'll pick up. And it did. I started to like it. Demon Slayer is very good. I like Tanjiro as the main character. I'm liking like all of the characters so far. There's not one that ever comes on screen that I'm like, oh God, not you. So I think that's a good sign. So yeah, Demon Slayer is good. Would recommend. Okay. That is all I have. That was my reading / little bit of watching for the month of April. So yeah, I guess that's all for me. Until next time, have just a really great day. Farewell.